Chapter 1 Dad died just after time travel. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Your Highness Arthur, wake up. Something bad has happened. His Royal Highness the Duke has been assassinated. Her Majesty the Queen wants to see you. The door to the luxuriously decorated room was suddenly pushed open, and a gentleman who looked mature and steady was blushing. His eyes were wet, and he rushed in and shouted loudly. Noom. Ha, ha. The sleeping Connaught Arthur woke up instantly, climbed out of bed, and quickly asked the old gentleman, Butler Hunter, what happened? There is no time to say more. Your Highness Arthur, go to Her Majesty the Queen. Her Royal Highness the Duke was assassinated on the streets of London this morning. Now the royal family and the entire government are pursuing this matter. The butler named Hunter blushed. He said with a slight cry in his eyes. Ah! What happened? How could my father be assassinated? Connaught Arthur was shocked and asked in disbelief. Connaught Arthur's father, Arthur William Patrick Albert, was one of the greatest monarchs in the history of the British Empire, the third son of Queen Victoria, and the distinguished Connaught and Connaught Emperor of the British Empire. The Duke of Strathearn and the Earl of Sussex, Connaught Arthur was unwilling to believe that such noble princes and dukes were assassinated in the capital of their country. I don't know. Everything was fine in the beginning. Who would have thought that an assassin would suddenly come to assassinate His Highness? There is no time to think about it now. Your Highness, go to Her Majesty's side first. At least it is absolutely safe there now. New Butler Hunter said with sadness and concern. Speaking of old Butler Hunter's resume, although it is not brilliant, it is very profound. Ever since Duke Arthur William Patrick Albert was awarded the title of Knight in 1874, Butler Hunter has been the steward of the entire principality and Duke Arthur, and it has been more than 20 years now. In the past 20 years, not only did Duke Arthur grow into a qualified duke step by step, but also Connaught Arthur grew up under the watch of Butler Hunter. This is why Butler Hunter was so sad when he heard that Duke Arthur William Patrick Albert had been assassinated. Then what should we do now? Connaught Arthur has only been in this body for a few months. In these few months, he doesn't know much about the environment he is in now. In addition, my previous understanding of the British Empire was only half knowledge. I only knew that Queen Victoria was one of the greatest monarchs in British history and was known as the grandmother of the European royal family. Under such circumstances, after his original father, Duke Arthur William Patrick Albert, was assassinated, Connaught Arthur didn't know what to do for a while. Go to Her Majesty the Queen first. The most important thing now is to ensure your safety, Her Majesty. Butler Hunter said decisively. After losing Duke Arthur William Patrick Albert, a lord who cared about his children whom he had watched grow up, Butler Hunter could no longer tolerate another accident involving Connaught Arthur, whom he had watched grow up. Okay, Butler Hunter. Connaught Arthur also understood the importance of the matter and nodded. Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria's chamber. At this time, the conference room was filled with senior officials and members of the royal family from the United Kingdom, and all of them were at least absolutely senior officials at the ministerial level. Her Majesty the Queen, please express your condolences. The passing of His Royal Highness Duke Arthur is regrettable, but the most important thing now is to find out the cause of the assassination and the real culprit behind it. The current British Prime Minister Robert Searcy said with a sad face. No matter what, the assassination of a dignified prince and noble duke of the British Empire in the capital of the British Empire is a huge humiliation for both the royal family and the government. This is not only a provocation to the dignity of the royal family, but also a provocation to the dignity of the British Empire. You must know that the British Empire is now the world's most powerful country, and its navy has crushed the second and third most powerful countries in the world. Under such a premise, someone who dares to plan an assassination of the Duke and Prince of the British Empire in London, the capital of the British Empire, is equivalent to a slap in the face of the British Empire and the British royal family. The Prime Minister is right. Check it out for me immediately. Within 3 days, I want to know all the information about the murderer and whether there is anyone behind him who instigated him. Anyone involved in this assassination will be arrested. Release after confirming that there is no suspicion. I want those who dare to hurt Arthur to understand that the dignity of the royal family is not so easily provoked. At the top of the list, the 80-year-old Queen Victoria looked sad and angry. Speaking of, Prince Arthur William Patrick Albert has been Queen Victoria's favorite son since his birth, although a large part of his favor was lost after the birth of his sister, Princess Beatrice. But he remained Queen Victoria's favorite son, especially after the second son, Prince Alfred, went to Germany to inherit the title, and the fourth son, Prince Leopold, died of hemophilia in 1884. Prince Arthur became even more valued by Queen Victoria. In addition, the eldest son Edward was not cared for by Queen Victoria in the first place. After repeated scandals of personal indiscretions, Queen Victoria paid even less attention to him. It is precisely because of this that rumors have repeatedly spread in British political circles and among the people that Queen Victoria will appoint Prince Arthur as Crown Prince. Although Queen Victoria did not make any move to dethrone Edward as Crown Prince, it is unknown whether she thought so in private. Dong dong dong, that there was a sudden knock on the door, interrupting Queen Victoria's angry roar. Everyone looked towards the door, trying to see who dared to disturb Queen Victoria's anger at this time. Grandma. Arthur walked in slowly, calling with red eyes. This voice of grandmother instantly dispelled Queen Victoria's anger. Looking at the face in front of her that was very similar to her favorite son, Queen Victoria couldn't help but shed 2 tears from the corners of her eyes, and she choked with sobs. Good boy, come to Grandma. Don't worry, with Grandma here, no one can hurt you. Queen Victoria stepped forward, took Arthur's hand, and led him to the top position. Your Highness Arthur. Government officials saluted Arthur one after another. If the order is passed, all Arthur's titles will be inherited by young Arthur, including all castles and properties. Arthur will be buried with the treatment of a prince, and the country's flags will be flown at half-mast for 3 days. Queen Victoria stroked Arthur's face with red eyes and sadly said. Chapter 2 Funeral. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Block all exits from London and the murderer must not be released. Knew that I want to hear the good news from the government within 3 days. Queen Victoria said coldly. Yes, Your Majesty, Prime Minister Robert Circe responded solemnly. Prime Minister Roberto Circe knows that if the murderer cannot be caught and brought to justice within the time stipulated by Her Majesty the Queen, then his days as Prime Minister may be over. Although the United Kingdom is one of the most representative constitutional monarchies in the world, the rights of the British King have been too restricted. But no one can deny that Queen Victoria, who single-handedly created the glorious Victorian era, has regained a lot of power. Appointing and removing the Prime Minister is just a matter of words. Where is Arthur now? Queen Victoria asked sadly. At the Royal Hospital, Princess Louise is also there. Prime Minister Roberto Circe responded. Princess Louise is the wife of Duke Arthur, the grandniece of King Frederick IV of Prussia and the German Emperor Wilhelm I, the cousin of the current German Emperor Wilhelm II, and the mother of Arthur. Let's go and see Arthur for the last time and see my poor child. Queen Victoria sighed as if resigned to her fate, and her already aging body suddenly seemed to become much more rickety. The Royal Hospital is an ancient hospital built in the last century and is also the private hospital of the entire British royal family. Famous doctors from all over the UK and even the world gather here, and it is also one of the world's top hospitals. A carriage convoy slowly set off from Buckingham Palace and headed straight to its destination, the Royal Hospital, and in the Royal Hospital. A full 2 hours have passed since Duke Arthur was sent to the hospital for rescue. As early as an hour ago, Duke Arthur lost his breathing and heartbeat forever. At this time, sitting in front of Duke Arthur's body were his wife, Princess Louise, and 2 daughters, Margaret and Patricia. Even the youngest daughter, Patricia, is 14 years old and is no longer an ignorant age, seeing that their originally amiable father had lost his breath and was lying on the hospital bed with a pale face. Both Marjorie and Patricia couldn't accept it. They lay on Duke Arthur's body and cried loudly. Princess Louise on the side was a little better. At least she could control her slightly collapsed emotions, so that she would not be as uncontrollable as her 2 daughters, but the red eyes and the hazy mist in the corners of her eyes also proved that Princess Louise was not in a good mood. New boom, boom, boom. Following the sound of noisy footsteps, Princess Louise looked towards the door and immediately spotted Queen Victoria walking slowly holding Arthur's hand. "Your Majesty, Arthur," Princess Louise said, forcing herself to control her emotions. In the West, whether it is a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law, they usually call their parents-in-law and father-in-law by their first names. Given Queen Victoria's distinguished status, Princess Louise naturally cannot directly call Queen Victoria by her first name, but instead uses an honorific title instead. Louis, Marjorie, Patricia. Queen Victoria nodded slowly towards Princess Louis, then looked at Marjorie, Patricia, and finally slowly turned her eyes to the girl on the hospital bed. Duke Arthur said with difficulty, "Arthur." "Arthur, knew I did." When she called out Duke Arthur's name again, Queen Victoria had already hurried to Duke Arthur's bedside. Caressing Duke Arthur's gradually cold face, Queen Victoria said slowly, "Arthur, don't worry, Mother will avenge you. I will also take good care of Louis and the 3 little guys, and I will never let people hurt them. May God guide you to heaven, my son." Prime Minister Robert. Turning around, Queen Victoria, who was originally a sad mother who lost her child, turned into the monarch who had been in power for decades and said coldly, "Check it for me. Whether it's London or the UK, even if it's Europe or America. As long as any accomplices related to the assassins are found, arrest them all. At the same time, inform the whole world that any behavior that participates in or assists the murderers is a declaration of war with the British Empire. No matter what the cost, we must get to the bottom of it. Yes, Her Majesty the Queen, I will go right away." Prime Minister Roberto Cerci responded quickly. In anger, Queen Victoria was a presence that the entire British political arena had to avoid. No one dared to challenge Her Majesty's majesty, and no one dared to question Her Majesty's rights. In addition, prepare for Arthur's funeral immediately. Don't let my children wait too long. The sooner Arthur is sent to heaven, the more relieved I will be. Queen Victoria instructed. Funerals in the West are quite cumbersome, especially for those like Duke Arthur who are buried with princely standards. The process is even more cumbersome. Not only do regional bishops need to be hired to pray and instruct the souls of the deceased to ascend to heaven, but they also need to wash the body and take communion, etc. This series of preparations would take at least several days, which was intolerable to Queen Victoria. "I understand, Your Highness." Prime Minister Roberto naturally did not dare to refuse and quickly agreed. Queen Victoria gave instructions to Princess Louise, Marjorie, and Patricia for a long time before taking Arthur and everyone away. 1 Royal Cemetery, Windsor, Berkshire, United Kingdom. This is a private cemetery for members of the British royal family, where many distinguished kings and royal family members are buried over the past hundreds of years. And now, there is another corpse on this land, and that is Duke Arthur. In the early morning, Queen Victoria took all members of the royal family to attend the funeral, accompanied by a team of royal guards for ceremony and security. This noble and distinguished duke has a short but colorful life experience. Not only has he served as an officer in South Africa, Canada, Ireland, Egypt and India, he is also the current Commander-in-Chief of Ireland and the chief of the 6 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy. Recipient and Field Marshal of the United Kingdom. This also led to many people spontaneously seeing off Duke Arthur at Duke Arthur's funeral. Duke Arthur's coffin set off from the royal hospital, traveled slowly on the royal carriage, and arrived at the royal cemetery, with many British people, all members of the royal family and government officials seeing him off. Duke Arthur's coffin was also placed in a prepared tomb, and the bishop gave the final blessing. Arthur looked at all this and felt a little confused. He had just traveled through time for less than 3 months and lost his father, Duke Arthur, who was very kind to him. What should he do next? Chapter 3. I'm going to Australia. You are listening at novelfull.audio. 1. The 3rd day after Duke Arthur was buried. This was the 3rd day after Queen Victoria issued an order to the government, and 5 days had passed since Duke Arthur was assassinated. Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria's offices. Early in the morning, Queen Victoria sat on her desk with a livid complexion and red eyes. The pile of documents originally piled up on the desk had all been thrown aside by Queen Victoria in anger. The reason why the 81-year-old woman is so angry is naturally because of the recent assassination of her favorite son, Duke Arthur, thanks to Britain's world-leading intelligence agency. A list of names and detailed information about all those involved in the assassination was delivered to Queen Victoria's desk in just a few days. Because this involves royal secrets, no one else knows about this list of information. Arthur. My poor Arthur, I'm sorry for you. Queen Victoria looked at the list with red eyes. The list clearly stated that Duke Arthur was assassinated by a die-hard gunman under the influence of Crown Prince Edward. Albert, it was me who killed our child. New book Arthur never wanted to compete with Edward, but unexpectedly he died in the struggle for the throne. Queen Victoria had tears in her eyes, said regretfully, Prince Albert was Queen Victoria's lifelong companion. Even though Prince Albert has passed away for nearly 40 years now, Queen Victoria still misses Prince Albert from time to time. Duke Arthur is Queen Victoria's favorite son, because Prince Albert died on the way to visit Crown Prince Edward. Queen Victoria, who loved Prince Albert, was displeased and never allowed Prince Edward to participate in government affairs. It was not until Queen Victoria's health deteriorated in recent years that Prince Edward had the opportunity to gradually come into contact with various government affairs. But at the same time, as the only prince sealed in the British mainland, Duke Arthur not only held a high position in the army, but was also loved by Queen Victoria. This obvious gap is why it has been repeatedly rumored in the British political arena and among the people that Queen Victoria wants to establish a new crown prince. Perhaps Crown Prince Edward is dissatisfied with Queen Victoria's favoritism for Duke Arthur and wants to get rid of the biggest threat to his succession to the throne. Or perhaps it is those who are loyal to Crown Prince Edward who want to smooth the way for their master. In short, Duke Arthur is indeed he died at the hands of the Crown Prince's forces. Although the entire assassination case was well hidden, and even the entire assassination was divided into several links, which greatly eliminated the suspicion of Crown Prince Edward and the Crown Prince's influence, the clues were still discovered by intelligence agencies. Edward. Queen Victoria looked at the word Crown Prince on the document that stung her eyes. Her emotions surged, but she couldn't say a word. After a long time, Queen Victoria recovered from her extreme grief and said to the door, Beatrice, go and ask little Arthur to come over. Princess Beatrice is Queen Victoria's youngest child and her greatest support in the 40 years since her husband lost her. Princess Beatrice, who now also lost her husband, has always been by Queen Victoria's side and is Queen Victoria's unofficial secretary and closest person. Okay, mother. Princess Beatrice left quickly. Not long after, little Arthur was taken to Queen Victoria's office by Princess Beatrice. Old butler Hunter escorted him all the way to the door of the office, and then he waited outside the door with confidence, looking at the young man walking towards her step by step outside the door. Queen Victoria finally showed a smile she had not seen for a long time, and whispered to little Arthur, Arthur, come to Grandma. Upon hearing this, Arthur immediately quickened his pace, stepped forward, helped Queen Victoria back to her seat, and then said, Grandma, Arthur is here. Arthur, how have you slept these past 2 days? Queen Victoria tried her best to maintain her normal self, but her slightly trembling voice betrayed her emotions. It's very good, Grandma. But don't be too sad. Although my father is gone, the country still needs you, Grandma. I and all the royal family members also need you, Grandma. Arthur looked at Queen Victoria's face. Naturally, she understands how cruel it is for this elderly queen to lose her beloved son in old age. Good boy, don't worry about Grandma. Grandma is very good. After a while, I will officially hold a ceremony for you to inherit the title. If you need anything else, just tell Grandma. After hearing this, Queen Victoria smiled and touched her hand. Touched Arthur's head and said, Grandma. Hearing Queen Victoria say this, Arthur wanted to speak, but he didn't know where to start. Perhaps his request was another blow to the elderly Queen Victoria. Seeing Queen Victoria's care for him, Arthur was a little speechless. What's wrong, child? Don't worry, Grandma is here. Seemingly seeing Arthur's hesitation, Queen Victoria smiled relievedly and consoled him. Grandma, I don't want to stay here anymore. I want to go out and relax. Arthur gritted his teeth and said his request. Queen Victoria was not as excited as expected, but was very silent. After a long time, Queen Victoria asked in a hoarse voice, "Where do you want to go?" "Arthur. I don't know, maybe Australia or New Zealand. I heard that the sea view there is good, and it may be more suitable for relaxing." Arthur said, "Such a loophole will obviously not fool Queen Victoria. If we just talk about the sea view in the UK is very good. There is no need to go to Australia, thousands of miles away." But when she thought of Arthur's reason for wanting to go out and relax, Queen Victoria didn't know how to speak. "So, Arthur, will you come back?" Queen Victoria asked, "Will you come back?" Arthur asked himself, if it wasn't something particularly important, probably not, although under the control of Queen Victoria, young Arthur can roam anywhere in the British Empire, but how long can Queen Victoria hold on? Based on the original history, Queen Victoria died just 1 year later on 1. Now, Queen Victoria has experienced the pain of losing her son again, and it is unclear whether she can survive until January next year. Chapter 4: The Queen's Decision. You are listening at novelfull.audio. I understand, Arthur. I agree with you going out, but not now. Queen Victoria was silent for a long time, then nodded with difficulty and said, "Thank you, Grandma." Arthur finally breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Queen Victoria gratefully. "When the matters during this period are settled, I will accompany you to Australia to have a look." Queen Victoria suddenly spoke, but her words were shocking. "Are you going to Australia?" Arthur was suddenly startled, and then thought of Queen Victoria's trip to the Isle of Wight, a small island in the north of New Zealand, just to miss Prince Albert and their children at the last moment of her life. Great time spent. Yes. Queen Victoria seemed to be immersed in beautiful memories. It took a long time to come back to her senses. She looked at Arthur and said with a smile, "Grandma will be able to stay with Arthur for a while, and she may never see her again." Hearing what Queen Victoria said, Arthur's nose suddenly became sore, and tears seemed to well up in his eyes, but Arthur held them back. "No, Grandma. You can stay with Arthur for a long time, and Grandma will at least live a long life." Arthur said quickly. In fact, when Queen Victoria went to the Isle of Wight, she had clearly learned about her physical condition, but she still chose to travel hard to miss her husband and children. Now that Queen Victoria has once again experienced the pain of losing her son, she may have felt that her body is not as good as before, and she plans to go to the Isle of Wight to bring her life to a successful end. Okay, Grandma will live a long life. Queen Victoria smiled and nodded, not refuting Arthur's words, but her slightly sad eyes and slightly trembling hands proved that she did not believe it. "Arthur, are you really going to Australia?" After coming back to her senses, Queen Victoria looked at Arthur with some seriousness and asked, "You must know that Australia is no better than the British mainland. It used to be a penal colony for our criminals. Although it is no longer there are still a large number of Australians who are disobedient to education." Queen Victoria explained, "If you want to go to Australia, then you must be prepared at any time. The people there are not obedient people. You must hold on to your gun and wealth to ensure that you and the most important person will not be harmed." "Yes, I'm ready, Grandma." Arthur nodded and said equally solemnly, "That's okay, Arthur." Queen Victoria touched Arthur's head and said, "I will tell the government that all the territories you inherit now will be exchanged with Australia, and the title will also become the Duke of Australia. Of course, if you can't stand life in Australia, Grandma is always ready to welcome you back." "Thank you, Grandma." Arthur nodded gratefully. After all, Queen Victoria is good to her family, especially to Duke Arthur and Princess Beatrice. Queen Victoria is the dearest mother. Of course, Queen Victoria's care for Arthur can also be felt now, especially after Duke Arthur's unexpected death. Whether intentionally or unintentionally, Queen Victoria cares more about Arthur. Queen Victoria acted quickly. Just the next day, the British government issued a notice that several Australian colonies were merged into the Duchy of Australia, ruled by Arthur. several titles that Arthur originally inherited from his father were also returned to the British Empire. On the surface, this territory exchange was a huge loss for Arthur. After all, although his two dukedoms were not large in area, they were actually the core areas of the British Empire. In exchange, Australia was once a penal colony for criminals in the British Empire decades ago. Now it is just a colony with a vast land area, but sparse population and backward economy and industry. Even if it becomes a complete territory after integration, it still lacks infrastructure and will not be able to compare with Arthur's original two duchies for at least several decades. Although everyone from the British government to the British civilians were surprised by this territorial exchange, they understood something when they thought about the assassination of Duke Arthur not long ago. At this time, 20 days had passed since Arthur's territory exchange, and everyone had accepted it, including Queen Victoria and Arthur. During this time, in addition to Queen Victoria occasionally paying attention to Arthur and Princess Louise as well as Margaret and Patricia, Princess Beatrice and Crown Prince Edward also visited. Perhaps knowing that he would have no trouble inheriting the throne after Arthur exchanged territories, Crown Prince Edward was also very kind to Arthur and even promised to sponsor Arthur with a sum of money when he went to the territory. Because of Queen Victoria's deliberate concealment, Arthur did not yet know that his father-killing enemy was his uncle, Prince Edward, but no matter what, Arthur would not refuse Prince Edward's gift. After all, Australia's future development will take time and also require a large amount of funds to support it. Although Arthur has a way to obtain a large amount of funds, it may even be able to support Australia's development in the next few years, but this amount of money is difficult to obtain in a short period of time. At least until Arthur has complete control of Australia, Arthur will not touch the idea of this unexpected wealth. After 20 days of preparation, Queen Victoria also announced the news to all her children and the government that she chose to drag her exhausted body to the Isle of Wight in New Zealand to recuperate. The Queen's decision still caused turmoil in the British political arena. After all, when she died at the age of 18, Queen Victoria had lived in seclusion for more than 10 years, although Queen Victoria later became active again, and celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Queen's accession to the throne. She was welcomed by a large number of British civilians, but this does not mean that Queen Victoria's seclusion has little impact on British politics. On the contrary, the current Queen Victoria plays an irreplaceable stabilizing role both in British politics and in the entire British Empire. Queen Victoria is a great and irreplaceable monarch in British politics and even in the hearts of all British civilians. This phenomenon also appeared in later generations of Queen Victoria. The long reign greatly increased the prestige of the Queen and the royal family among the people. Coupled with the great rise of the British Empire in the Victorian era, Queen Victoria had a great influence on Britain. Say it is more important. Second update, please support. Chapter 5: The Crown Prince's Gift. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In fact, it is not the British Empire. Even for the royal families of most European monarchies, Queen Victoria is the benchmark for monarchies. Noted, Queen Victoria is not called the grandmother of Europe for nothing. The royal families of many countries have close blood relationships with Queen Victoria. Even Wilhelm II, Emperor of the German Empire, one of the great powers, is also Queen Victoria's grandson. Based on the original history, when Queen Victoria died on the Isle of Wight, she was surrounded by many of her descendants, including Crown Prince Edward and Kaiser Wilhelm II. As Kaiser Wilhelm II, he was able to accompany Queen Victoria at all times, which shows how high Queen Victoria's status is to the major European royal families. Not surprisingly, Queen Victoria's idea was opposed by the vast majority of people. No one would want Queen Victoria, who is already over 80 years old, to travel all the way just to get to the Isle of Wight, which is more than 10,000 kilometers away. Even though many people understand Queen Victoria's longing for her deceased relatives, neither the British Empire nor the European royal family can accept the blow caused by the loss of Queen Victoria. However, Queen Victoria was determined and no one could stop her, not even Prime Minister Robert and Crown Prince Edward. The only good thing is that Queen Victoria did not decide to leave immediately, but waited until Arthur took care of everything before heading to Australia with Arthur. Although Duke Arthur was assassinated at a young age, he left Arthur a large amount of wealth and property. Putting aside the two duchies and an earldom that have been replaced by Australia, the several castles and 2 military factories, a steel factory and a shipyard that were originally under the control of Duke Arthur. Alone are worth at least hundreds of millions of pounds. Duke Arthur also left a large number of shares in factories or companies in industry and other industries, with a valuation of at least tens of millions of pounds. Now that Arthur is going to Australia, most of these properties need to be relocated or all liquidated in order to be of maximum use. For Arthur, all the shares he holds need to be liquidated. Although these shares may appreciate in value in the future, Arthur, who is about to go to Australia, obviously does not have much time to wait for these stocks to appreciate, might as well turn it all into pounds and contribute to Australia's development. As for those shipyards, steel plants and military factories, it would be better to relocate them all to Australia if possible. These factories are very scarce for Australia. They can not only fill Australia's long-standing industrial gap, but also accelerate Australia's industrial and technological development. New.as for the castles left by Duke Arthur. If nothing else happens, Arthur will not return to the British Empire, so there is no need to keep them. All of these castles are ancient castles with a history of hundreds of years. They cover a very large area and have very complete supporting infrastructure. They also have gardens, multiple restaurants, and a large number of precious works of art. The value of these castles alone may exceed £60 million, which is a quarter of the total annual fiscal revenue of the British Empire. The good news is that Butler Hunter has been responsible for taking care of Duke Arthur's property before, so he is very familiar with all Duke Arthur's properties. After learning that Arthur planned to sell off all his properties and go to Australia, Butler Hunter did not object and just silently helped Arthur sell the properties that he had managed alone. Perhaps because the British Empire is now booming and its developed economy has created many wealthy people, the sale of Duke Arthur's property went smoothly. It only took a month for most of the stocks and castles to be sold. The castle, in particular, was very popular with the nobles. Not only were they all sold, but they also brought Arthur a total income of up to £70 million, coupled with the income from the sale of shares. Arthur's current cash in hand has reached a terrifying £87 million. March 3, Buckingham Palace. This was Arthur's last day in the British Empire, and it was also the day before Queen Victoria decided to travel. The British government was extremely busy on this day. It not only had to deal with daily government affairs, but also once again confirmed Queen Victoria's preparations for tomorrow's trip. As the Queen of the British Empire, Queen Victoria's standards of etiquette when traveling cannot be low. During this trip, Queen Victoria will not only bring a royal guard of up to 2,000 people, but also a fleet including 2 battleships and 5 cruisers to escort her. Accompanying them were members of the royal family including Princess Beatrice, Arthur, Princess Louise, Marjorie and Patricia, Palace Butler Harvey, and Deputy Prime Minister John. In order to take care of Queen Victoria's daily life, 12 additional servants, 3 maids, 5 cooks and 2 pastry chefs were brought along on this trip. After making all the final preparations, Queen Victoria also began to say her final goodbyes to government officials and Prince Edward. The farewell between Prince Edward and Queen Victoria was very stiff, perhaps because both of them had their own concerns, but after all, his wish was achieved. Crown Prince Edward seemed very relaxed and happy at this time. He smiled and told Arthur beside Queen Victoria, "Arthur, after you go to your own territory, remember not to act recklessly. Your people, it is the foundation of a territory. Only a popular ruler can rule a country for a long time. Learn more from your grandmother and strive to be a qualified ruler." "Yes, uncle." Although he didn't understand why Crown Prince Edward seemed a little active, Arthur could only regard it as his uncle's instructions when he was about to leave. "Edward, Arthur is about to leave. As an uncle, don't you have any expression at all?" Suddenly, Queen Victoria, who had been silent at the side, suddenly spoke, staring at Edward with a somewhat thoughtful look. "Oh, damn, how could I forget such an important thing?" Crown Prince Edward immediately broke into a cold sweat, and then quickly said, "Arthur, I promised you a gift when you left the territory, and now is the time to honor it." "Yes. I heard that you were selling off all your property some time ago, and there is nothing I can do to help you. Let me give you £20 million in my personal name, and then ask the London Bank to give you an interest-free loan of £30 million. This is a belated birthday gift to you. I couldn't have a happy birthday with you due to special circumstances before, but I still wish you a happy 17th birthday. First update, please support. Chapter 6, Mobilize the Troops and Mobilize the Masses. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Rather than saying it was a belated birthday gift, it was more of a symbolic compensation to Arthur under the threat of Queen Victoria and the satisfaction of achieving his goal. Arthur's 17th birthday was on January 13th. Although influenced by Duke Arthur, he and his family celebrated this birthday quietly without any celebration or party, but this does not mean that the British royal family, headed by Queen Victoria and Crown Prince Edward, are unaware of the incident. On the contrary, as the Crown Prince who was named Prince of Wales at a young age, Prince Edward has cultivated a lot of power of his own over a long period of time. Although it is not worth mentioning to Queen Victoria, it is definitely not enough to even celebrate Arthur's birthday. Do not know at all, but no matter what, the £50 million offered by Crown Prince Edward is real, and Arthur will naturally not refuse it. Although £30 million of this is a loan from the Bank of London, most of the shares of the Bank of London are in the hands of Crown Prince Edward, so the £30 million is actually equivalent to a gift. As a result, Arthur's capital will soon reach £137 million. In terms of personal property, Arthur is confident that he can enter the top 5 in the world. Not paying attention to Arthur's reaction, Crown Prince Edward finally breathed a sigh of relief after seeing Queen Victoria's satisfied expression. The Crown Prince understands that although he seems to be the stable first heir to the throne, as long as Queen Victoria announces the abolition of her status as Crown Prince, the majority of the British people and political circles will definitely recognize this. Don't underestimate Queen Victoria's status in the hearts of British civilians. For Britain to be able to integrate into a huge United Kingdom, Queen Victoria's supreme status in the hearts of various kingdoms is an indispensable condition. Arthur, you should have become the Supreme Duke of the British Empire, but if you want to go to remote Australia, I will not stop you. As your grandmother, I have nothing to give you, so I will give you a compensation of £100 million. And industrial equipment worth £50 million. Queen Victoria touched Arthur's head and said, "After all, Australia is a remote area. Let alone education and medical conditions, the infrastructure is very backward and very unstable." Queen Victoria said slowly, "The money I give you is not for you to have fun. It's for pleasure, but for you to use this money and these industrial equipment to develop Australia's infrastructure, medical care, education, and industry, not only for yourself, but also for all Australians, right?" "I understand, Grandma. Now that I have become the Duke of Australia, I will make the development of the entire Australia my lifelong goal." Arthur nodded and said solemnly, "That's good. Although we are traveling together this time, you are going to Australia and I am going to New Zealand. MXNHS can always watch you and protect you. You have to walk the road in the future on your own. Victoria." The Queen continued her instructions. "On behalf of the British royal family, I present to you a Royal Guards force of 2,000 people. Their families will also follow you to Australia. Arthur, if you can't stand it, go to New Zealand to find your grandmother. Don't hold on." Queen Victoria's seemingly nagging words were as heartwarming as the warm sunshine of spring in Arthur's heart. It has been more than 5 months since she came to this world, and Queen Victoria is one of the few people who treats herself sincerely. The fleet that had been prepared for more than half a month finally set off, but this time the scale of the fleet was greatly expanded again, and the accompanying guards were as high as 4,000 people, half of which already belonged to Arthur personally. Speaking of the Royal Guards, also called the Royal Guards Division, it is a private army belonging only to the British royal family. It has a history of hundreds of years. Each guardsman is an elite member carefully selected from the British Army. In terms of daily training and discipline, they are far stronger than the ordinary British Army. Although the Royal Navy of the British Empire is famous all over the world, the British Army is not famous, but in fact, the combat effectiveness of the regular British Army ranks among the top 3 in Europe. In addition to being slightly inferior to the German Army and the French Army, both the quality of the soldiers and the weapons and equipment are ahead of the armies of other European countries. The combat effectiveness of the Royal Guards Division carefully selected from these British armies is already comparable to that of the elite German army. The Royal Guards Division, composed of 5 infantry regiments, 2 cavalry regiments and 1 reserve regiment, is actually an important means for the British royal family to maintain its rule. The departure of the fleet was welcomed by a large number of London citizens. Even after the fleet had completely departed, the fanatical crowd stayed at the port for a long time and refused to leave. On March 14, after a 10-day voyage, the fleet arrived at the Suez Canal, which is now and will be the busiest waterway in the world. The Suez Canal connects Eastern Africa with India, Southeast Asia and other regions, and is regarded by the British as an important means of controlling India. Because of this, since the British Empire took control of the Suez Canal, it has stationed heavy troops in the Suez Canal to protect this very important waterway. The guards on the canal had learned of Queen Victoria's imminent arrival very early and had already formed a formation on the canal to welcome her. Arthur also felt the admiration and respect that the British people of this era had for Queen Victoria. This was not only the pride of all British people for the achievements of the British Empire, but also the recognition of the Queen who had been in charge of the Empire for decades. Together with Queen Victoria, after reviewing the canal defenders, the fleet set off again, this time to India. Queen Victoria's journey may not be as simple as recuperation. Although the purpose of the journey is very clear, it still has to stop at the Suez Canal, India and Australia before arriving at the White Island in New Zealand. The 3 docking places chosen by Queen Victoria all have special meanings. Needless to say, Australia will be Arthur's future territory. Queen Victoria's choice of docking in Australia is not without the intention of shocking the local forces. The Suez Canal and India were strategic areas that could not be lost to the British Empire. Britain's rise was partly due to the technological leadership brought by the Industrial Revolution, and partly to the large land population and cheap resources brought by external colonization. India, in particular, not only has an inexhaustible labor force and a large number of excellent ports, but also has abundant crop output and is known as the crown jewel. For the British Empire, the importance of British India was far greater than that of all other colonies. Second update, please support. Chapter 7 Arriving in India. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The 3 stopping places chosen by Queen Victoria were actually the last things Queen Victoria wanted to do for the British Empire and Arthur. Stopping at the Suez Canal and India could stabilize Indian hearts and minds and strengthen the British Empire's rule in India. The stop in Australia is a very obvious platform for Arthur, so that Arthur can have a good foundation in Australia. After sailing for half a month, the fleet finally arrived at Calcutta, the capital of the Indian Empire. India was originally administered by the British East India Company. Each state was nominally independent and recognized the British king as its co-owner. But since the Indian National Revolt, the British East India Company completed its mission and handed over power to Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria also became the Queen of 187 and established the Indian Empire. Since then, India has completely ended its previous status of semi-independent and semi-colony, and completely reduced to a colony of the British Empire. The current Governor-General of India is George Curzon, who is famous for dividing Bengal and India, sending troops to the north, and demarcating the Soviet-Polish border. At noon, the fleet successfully docked at the port of Calcutta, and Arthur and Queen Victoria, who had been traveling on the ship for half a month, were finally able to go ashore to take a breath. Although the cruise ship prepared by the British government for Queen Victoria and Arthur was very luxurious, it not only had various facilities, but also had 2 small gardens and a swimming pool. But it has to be said that life on a cruise ship is not as real as on land. Although Arthur is still doing well, he still looks forward to setting foot on solid ground. At the port, Governor George, who had already heard the news, came up with Kitchener, Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army. Your Majesty the Queen, Your Highness the Duke. The 2 of them saluted. Because Queen Victoria also has the title of Queen of India, the 2 deliberately used the honorific title of Queen instead of Queen when saluting. Marquis George, General Kitchener, long time no see. Queen Victoria responded to the 2 with a smile. Governor George Curzon and General Kitchener both have a very obvious characteristic. Both of them are very capable talents and have their own unique understanding of things. but often such two people will have some conflicts in some aspects, and this was the case in the original history. Because of the disagreement between Governor George and General Kitchener, they were dismissed and returned to the country 5 years later. New, but a flaw cannot conceal the talents of two people. After returning to the UK, Governor George also served as Lord of the Privy Seal, a member of the War Cabinet, and Foreign Secretary and other important cabinet positions, and General Kitchener, who served as Secretary of War in I, also recruited a large number of volunteers without the consent of the cabinet before World War I. Although he was somewhat arbitrary, it was indeed thanks to his foresight that the British could there are a large number of professional troops fighting Germany to the end. George hasn't been back to the UK for 2 years. Thank you for staying in India. Queen Victoria looked at Governor George with a smile and expressed her condolences. Yes, Your Majesty, it has been 2 years. But I have not worked hard. India is one of the most important regions in the entire empire. It is an honor for me to be appointed by Your Majesty as the Governor-General of India. I will never betray His Majesty's trust. Put India into crisis. Governor George said solemnly. Well, that's good. In the future, India's stability will still need to be maintained by you and General Kitchener. I hope that this shining pearl of India will not become dusty in the hands of you two. Queen Victoria smiled happily. Speaking of new, Queen Victoria still trusted Governor George's ability, otherwise he would not have held such an important position as Governor-General of India at a very young age. General Kitchener, your contribution in South Africa is very significant. People are happy to call you a British hero. Queen Victoria looked at General Kitchener with a smile and said. I just did what I should do, Your Majesty. General Kitchener said with a military salute. No matter what, you have indeed made great contributions to the British Empire. I originally planned to reward you after you return to the UK. I think it is better to take advantage of today's opportunity and reward you directly. Queen Victoria said with a smile. Immediately, Queen Victoria immediately put away her smile, became serious, and said solemnly, General Kitchener, Commander-in-Chief of the Indian Army. Here, Your Majesty. In view of your outstanding contributions in Egypt and South Africa, you will be awarded the title of Baron of Khartoum and you will be allowed to return to the UK for a visit this year. In addition, this £50,000 is a reward for you. The Empire will never forget those who have contributed to the Empire. People. The Queen said solemnly. Thank you, Your Majesty, and long live Your Majesty and the Empire. General Kitchener took the £50,000 note handed over by the servant with some excitement. The £50,000 was not the real reason that excited General Kitchener. The Baron's reward was what moved this talented soldier. Although the Baron is only the lowest level in the traditional aristocratic system, there are 4 levels above, Viscount, Earl, Marquis, and Duke, but in fact, due to different cultural differences, the noble ranks of various European monarchies are also different. As far as the UK is concerned, British titles generally consist of Baron, Viscount, Earl, Duke, Prince, and King. It is not easy for ordinary people to be granted the title of Baron and Viscount based on merit. Generally, Earls and Dukes are inherited by members of the royal family or established nobles, and ordinary people have no chance to get involved. After a simple welcome ceremony, Queen Victoria took a carriage and moved into George's government house with Arthur. The guards were stationed outside Calcutta, leaving only a small group of more than 200 guards to ensure the safety of Queen Victoria at all times. Unlike other places, Queen Victoria will stay in India for 3 days. One is to review the achievements of India during this period, and the other is to rest for a while, which will also allow the fleet to replenish supplies. After all, considering that Queen Victoria is over 80 years old, although there is no shortage of supplies on the cruise ship, the rickety life on the ship is still a bit tiring for Her Majesty, especially after half a month of sea voyage. It was time for Queen Victoria to rest for a few days. After everyone got off the ship, the crew of the transport fleet began to transport supplies to the ship to ensure that the coal and living supplies on the ship could make it to the next destination, Australia. Chapter 8 Here I Come, Australia. You are listening at novelfold.audio. 1. The fleet, which took a short 3-day rest, set off again. This time its destination was Arthur's destination, Australia. New. Speaking of Australia, up to now, Australia is just a regional name. In fact, Australia is composed of 6 colonies: Western Australia, South Australia, Queensland, Victoria, New South Wales and Tasmania. Although these 6 colonies are located on the Australian continent, they are complete and culturally identical areas. However, due to various colonial issues and colonial strategies of the British in history, Australia was divided into 6 colonies. The colonies governed each other without interfering with each other. Since modern times, Australia's various colonies have also faced some common problems, including tariffs, transportation, postal services, defense and restrictions on Asian immigration. This has forced the 6 colonies to consider convening a colonial conference to discuss unified standards. In November 1880, the Melbourne Colony Conference agreed to establish a federal council, and the largest and most developed colony of New South Wales drafted a Federal Council Act. This was also a sign of the unity and union of Australia. The Federal Council was established in 1883, and a year later the colonies began to ask the British government to support the Federal Council's bill. In the 18th century, the first political party, the Labour Party, was established. The development of the trade union movement broke down the long-standing boundaries of the various colonies, and the calls for free trade and the beginning of union between the colonies became louder and louder. On the 18th, a meeting of representatives of the Federal League was held in Croy, calling and recommending that the colonies begin to take measures to prepare for the establishment of a federation. Even the 18th Committee had begun preparations for a referendum on the establishment of a federation. However, due to the inconsistent order among the colonies, the progress of the referendum was not high. It was not until Queen Victoria announced Australia as Arthur's new territory some time ago and decided to unify the 6 colonies into a complete Principality of Australia that the calls for unification among the colonies began to decrease, and they began to look forward to the new Principality of Australia. On April 27, after more than half a month of sailing, the fleet arrived in Sydney. The capital of New South Wales. New South Wales is the earliest British colony in Australia. It is also the Australian colony with the most population and the most developed economy. During the federalisation of Australia, New South Wales was also the colony with the most say and was also responsible for drafting the Federal Council Act. Judging from the situation in Australia, as long as you have control of New South Wales, you will basically have control of the situation in Australia. The Sydney port was already filled with people waiting to welcome him. At the front of the crowd were the prime ministers and officials of each colony, standing in a dense row, making it very lively. Beside the welcoming crowd, a group of soldiers were looking forward to it. The armies of their respective colonies obeyed directly the orders of the Ministry of Defence and Queen Victoria. After the fleet slowly docked, the crowd immediately burst into cheers. After the ceremony and music, Arthur supported Queen Victoria and slowly landed on Australian soil. Long live Her Majesty the Queen! Long live His Royal Highness the Duke! The crowd of onlookers spontaneously burst into cheers, loudly welcoming the arrival of the 2 rulers. Unlike in Suez Canal and India, Queen Victoria did not step forward, but motioned Arthur to go forward with her eyes. Arthur understood immediately, walked forward lightly, looked up at the excited crowd, and finally stood in front of the 6 prime ministers. Your Highness, welcome home. The 6 prime ministers said together. Arthur was stunned for a moment, then suddenly realized. Australia is already his only territory, and Arthur's future home will be in Australia. If there are no special events, the UK will basically not go back. You must be the prime ministers of each colony, right? How is Australia doing lately? Arthur asked with a smile. Yes, Your Highness. Please allow me to introduce you to the prime ministers of each colony. The leader smiled and said with a slight compliment. Yeah. Arthur motioned to continue. Your Highness, I am Evan H. Parkes, Prime Minister of New South Wales. The man continued, these are Victoria Prime Minister Walter Bragg, Queensland Prime Minister Andrew King Porter, Prime Minister of Tasmania Richard Noble Chapman, Prime Minister of Western Australia Pierre Silvio Berlusconi, Prime Minister of South Australia Thomas Check. Upon learning of your arrival, they immediately came from their respective. I came here from the area to welcome you and Her Majesty the Queen as soon as possible. Well, are you calling these people here? Arthur looked curiously at the excited crowd around him and asked. That's not true, Your Highness. What you don't know is that the 6 colonial branches of Australia are no longer suitable for the current situation. The different systems among the colonies have made mutual trade and exchanges extremely difficult, which has caused greater harm to the colonies and residents. Trouble. People have been looking forward to the federalization of Australia for a long time, and it is precisely because of you that Australia has a chance to unify this time. Thank you, Your Highness. Prime Minister Evan H. Park said, while expressing gratitude. Again salute to Arthur. It's nothing, Prime Minister Evan. From now on, I will also be a part of Australia. Isn't it what all Australians should do to maintain the unity of Australia? Arthur smiled and helped Prime Minister Evan. Okay, Prime Minister Evan, please take Your Majesty and I to rest first. The long sea journey is tiring enough. Let these people go back by the way. We can't delay their work and life by welcoming me. Arthur said with a smile. Yes, Your Highness, please come with me. I have asked people to clear out the highest floor of the government building. The conditions are not good, so I can only temporarily leave you and Her Majesty the Queen to live there. As he led the way, AI Prime Minister when explained to Arthur and Queen Victoria apologetically, before Australia established federation, Australia's economy had been mainly based on the sale of minerals, agriculture, and fisheries. Although it improved the situation in the early days of the colony when food had to be imported from Britain, it could only barely provide food and clothing. Coupled with the fact that the colonies were not connected to each other, Australia's overall economy was underdeveloped, its industry was very backward, and the finances of each colony were very tight. Although New South Wales, the richest city, is better off, it is just a fantasy to build a palace worthy of the status of Arthur and Queen Victoria. Second update, please support. In addition, I have already signed a contract, and my goal is to enjoy a few more rounds of testing the waters. Everyone who supports books, don't forget to vote and give the author a little support so that he can write better. Chapter 9 First Meeting. You are listening at novelfull.audio. A ray of morning sun shines through the leaves outside the window on the glass of the room, and then reflects on Arthur's eyes. New book barred. Arthur reached out his hand uncomfortably and tried to block the naughty light, but found that he couldn't completely block it no matter what. After a while, Arthur slowly opened his eyes. His brain suddenly turned on. He sat up suddenly and looked at the clock on the wall. It was already past 7 in the morning. Oops, it's almost 8 o'clock. I hope I can catch up with the meeting. Arthur said to himself, but he kept busy on his hands and quickly got dressed. According to tradition, someone should be responsible for Arthur's food and daily life, but Arthur really wasn't used to the arrogance of others dressing him, so he decided to take matters into his own hands. After finally washing up, it was already more than 10 minutes before I left the house. After leaving the door, the 2 guards at the door immediately saluted Arthur respectfully. Good morning, Your Highness. Good morning. The Prime Ministers probably didn't come to see me, right? Arthur asked. Today is the 3rd day after arriving in Australia on April 2. According to the agreement between Arthur and several Prime Ministers, a preliminary meeting on the detailed system of the Principality of Australia will be held at 8 o'clock this morning in order to better improve this country. Knew that it was almost 8 o'clock now, and Arthur didn't want to be late for his first meeting, although as a monarch, no one would say anything if Arthur was late for the meeting, but after all, he had just arrived, and he still had to leave a good impression on his subordinates and all the people. No, Your Highness, the guard responded. Call. Arthur breathed a sigh of relief and went downstairs to the conference room. In the 2 days since arriving in Australia, Arthur has taken a brief tour of the government building and the vicinity of Sydney. The first impression that today's Australia or New South Wales gave Arthur was that of tradition and backwardness, because the main sources of income are minerals and agriculture, and a considerable part of the income was previously sent to the British mainland. This also resulted in the economic conditions of several colonies not being very good, and the income of colonial residents was not high. Generally speaking, Australia is still in a stage where everything is waiting for improvement, but now that it is independent as a new principality, the economic situation is bound to be much better than before. Entering the conference room, the 6 prime ministers had been waiting for a long time. "Good morning, Your Highness." Everyone saluted. "Well, everyone, without further ado, let's get started," Arthur said after sitting on the main seat. "Your Highness, although under the orders of Her Majesty the Queen, Australia has become a unified and independent country in name. But in fact, as of now, except for the nominal unity, our system is still based on the previous 6 large colonies. I think we first need to change the colonial system. I suggest turning the 6 colonies into 6 autonomous states, and the capital will vote. And we can form a unified federal government based on these 6 autonomous states. We, the prime ministers, will become the governors of the new autonomous states, and we will be uniformly responsible to Your Highness." New South Wales Prime Minister Evans said, because he once presided over the drafting of the Federal Council Bill. Prime Minister Evan is still very clear about Australia's current status quo. New Book Bar, the biggest problem in Australia now is that the major colonies operate independently and do not interfere with each other. Although nominally unified into one country, Australia, in reality it is more like 6 independent countries. Do the other prime ministers have any opinions on this matter? Arthur turned to look at the others and asked with a smile, "Prime Minister Evans' proposal is basically similar to Australia's original historical process, which was to establish a federal government composed of autonomous states. The advantage of this is that a unified federal government can be established with minimal changes. The powers in the hands of the prime ministers of each colony have not changed, but have become governors. Perhaps the major colonies had already reached a consensus at the previous Federal Council, so no prime minister had any other opinions at this time. I think it is very necessary to establish a unified government in the shortest possible time," Arthur said with a smile when no one spoke, "but the government system still needs to be carefully considered. In my opinion, Australia used to be composed of your 6 colonies. The colonies were independent and did not interfere with each other. But now that it has formed a unified country, I think the title of colony should indeed be cancelled." Arthur read. He looked at Prime Minister Evan and said with a smile, "Prime Minister Evan's proposal is very good. I agree that the 6 colonies will be changed into 6 states. The names will not change and the capital will not change, but they will be unified and responsible to the new national government. As for whether newly formed states should be given autonomy, I think states only need to be responsible for the political affairs within the state. Defense and other matters should be responsible for the unified national government. What do you think?" Arthur smiled and looked at everyone. "Your Highness, I wonder what the new government election system is like. Is it modeled on the government system of the British Empire?" Prime Minister Evan asked tentatively. "If we talk about representatives of the constitutional monarchy, then the British Empire definitely has a place. As one of the first countries to launch a constitutional monarchy, the British Empire relied on the Industrial Revolution to quickly become the empire that dominates the world and the sun never sets. The advanced system of the British Empire also owes a lot to this, which is why Prime Minister Evan asked so. It cannot be denied that the system of the British Empire is indeed very advanced. But I think every country has its own national conditions, and we cannot copy them all. But there are many aspects that can be learned. I plan to establish a House of Lords and a House of Commons. Members of the House of Commons it is elected by the states and allocated according to the proportion of the number of people." Arthur said with a smile, "The House of Lords is elected by members of the royal family and people designated by me, as well as the House of Commons. The House of Commons is responsible for proposing laws, electing cabinet members, amending laws, etc. The upper house is responsible for reviewing laws proposed by the lower house, reviewing elected cabinet members, supervising officials, impeaching officials, amending the constitution, etc. The upper and lower houses will be one of the most important administrative agencies in our country, and the election of its members must also be cautious. The system of Houses of Lords and Commons proposed by Arthur is actually similar to the British system. The House of Commons is controlled by political parties and civilians, while the House of Lords is in the hands of the monarch. Although the House of Commons also has the power to propose and amend laws and elect cabinet members, the House of Lords is the final review body. Without the consent of the House of Lords, all proposals and election results of the House of Commons can be invalidated, which is also one of Arthur's trump cards. According to Arthur's proposal, the future Houses of Lords and Lower House will basically be in Arthur's hands, and cabinet members can be replaced at any time with those loyal to Arthur. Chapter 10 Monarchy. You are listening at novelfull.audio. If the Prime Ministers didn't know Arthur's thoughts before, they had to know now. In the original plan of several Prime Ministers, they only needed to coax Arthur into agreeing to establish a federal government united by autonomous states, and they would be able to retain a large amount of their power. Even if he cannot enter the national government of Australia, he can still retain his identity as governor, and he can even try to sideline Arthur. But according to Arthur's proposal, the upper and lower houses will be in Arthur's pocket, and the cabinet elected by the lower house will naturally not run away. The states that evolved from each colony also had no other rights. They could only be a governor and wait for the end of their term to seek re-election or give up. Several prime ministers were silent and just looked at the leader, Prime Minister Evan. Prime Minister Evan smiled bitterly, but he did not dare to stand up and speak out. Why didn't he understand what the other prime ministers meant? But in fact they were all colonial prime ministers sent to Australia from the British Empire. Although they gained a lot of power in Australia, the control was actually divided into two, and they had executive power, while several military commanders controlled the remainder. Now that Arthur has arrived in Australia, the Australian army is bound to hand over to Arthur. In addition, Queen Victoria is still here, who has the courage to jump out and sing against Arthur. Queen Victoria's destination was the Isle of Wight in New Zealand, and she also spent little time in the Suez Canal and India. But in Australia, Queen Victoria has stayed for 3 days and has no intention of leaving. Isn't this an expression of standing up for Arthur? Very well, since everyone has no other opinions, we can start preparations for converting the colony into a state and forming the House of Lords and the House of Lords. It is now approaching May, and I hope that the formal opening of the House of Commons will begin nationwide in mid-May. Election. Arthur said with a smile when no one objected. Now it seems that these guys are all very sensible, and there are no idiots who dare to jump out and speak against Arthur. You must know that even the entire Australian garrison only has more than 6,000 people, and they are scattered among the 6 major colonies. Queen Victoria and Arthur's guards totaled 4,000 people. Even if someone instigated rebellion, they could immediately suppress it. Yes, Your Highness. The 6 of them had no choice but to agree. Before the national government is formally established, Prime Minister Evan will serve as the interim Prime Minister for the time being, and several other Prime Ministers will serve as interim cabinet members. The construction of a new Australia still requires the joint efforts of everyone. We will strive to completely change our appearance by the end of May. Complete the government, Arthur said with a smile. Arthur still understands the principle of giving a sweet date to a stick. After depriving the 6 prime ministers of the state autonomy they wanted, Arthur promoted them to cabinet members of the provisional government in order to allow them to form the government. Providing a contribution in the process can speed up the progress of government formation. If they were really capable, Arthur wouldn't mind waiting until the government was established to push them and let them really sit on the throne of the cabinet or even the prime minister. Yes, Your Highness. Sure enough, after hearing Arthur's arrangement, several prime ministers seemed to suddenly have motivation and responded one after another. New. But at the same time, the establishment of a national government needs to be guided by a charter. It is time to promulgate our own constitution. Let's call it the Australian Constitution. The content of the constitution is based on the major European monarchies and revised based on our actual domestic situation. Has the Federal Council had any previous proposals for the constitution? Arthur asked. The Constitution is the basis for stipulating the detailed division of rights of various institutions of the state, and also fully clarifies the rights and obligations of each class. Both ordinary Australians and Arthur need a detailed and clear constitution to determine their rights. We have considered formulating a constitution, but it is obviously not in line with our current national conditions. Prime Minister Evan replied, the previous Federal Council was more biased toward a federal republic, which was completely different from the current Principality of Australia. Prime Minister Evan also wisely did not mention the constitution they had previously envisioned. Otherwise, if Arthur was offended, his interim prime ministership might be gone. Then let's discuss it briefly now. Do you have any good suggestions for our constitution? Arthur asked with a thoughtful smile. When it comes to the constitution, the UK is a rather special country. Unlike other countries with a clear constitutional system, the UK does not have a clear written constitution, but a system composed of statutory law, customary law and practice. This also resulted in the British monarch formally possessing a large number of powers, including the appointment and removal of all officials, colonial governors, bishops and senior church clergy, and the power to convene, stop and dissolve parliament, approve laws, declare war and make peace, etc. But in practice, a large part of these powers were transferred to the cabinet, and the powers of the British monarch were severely restricted. But it cannot be denied that if the British monarch has a large amount of voice, he can indeed use these formal powers easily. Take the current British monarch Queen Victoria as an example. If Queen Victoria wanted to appoint or remove any official in the British Empire, the British political arena would basically not object, but if Crown Prince Edward wants to appoint and remove important officials quickly after he takes office, he will have to see whether the impeachment by Parliament will be successful. Your Highness, I think our first constitution must first clarify the division of rights and responsibilities of various departments, as well as the structure and system of our country. Out of respect for you, your rights also need to be explained in detail. Premier Wen said with a slightly respectful smile, although Prime Minister Evan said very well, clarifying Arthur's rights is out of respect for Arthur, but in fact, everyone understands that once a monarch's power is clarified, it actually means that the monarch's power has been restricted. After all, the rights that are in the Constitution are legal, and the rights that are not in the Constitution are illegal, right? I think the German system with a clear constitution is very good, and Australia is also suitable for building a principality with a dual monarchy. Arthur said with a smile, the lower house is responsible for legislation and elections, and the upper house is responsible for supervising and removing officials and reviewing the lower house. Laws passed by the House and election results. The House of Commons is accountable to the electorate, and the House of Lords is accountable to me. At the same time, the ruler of Australia, which is me, has all the powers of the House of Lords and the House of Lords, and has the right to dissolve the Cabinet and the House of Lords at any time. Second update, please support and vote.